I study women's health and the culture and politics of reproduction. I'd like to set the context for Dr. Parker's talk today with a few facts. Abortion is common in the United States. About 1 in 3 American women will have an abortion by age 45. Almost 2/3 of those women are already mothers. 73% of women report a religious affiliation. Abortion is one of the safest surgical procedures, and abortion is in fact far safer for women than childbirth. Fewer than 0.5% of women experience complications after an abortion. But abortion is increasingly unavailable in the United States. Only 11% of US counties have at least one abortion provider, and 38% of women in the US do not have access to surgical abortions in their county of residence. The number of abortion providers has been declining over the last several decades. Abortion is even more restricted in the state of Mississippi, where Dr. Parker provides abortion care to women. In Mississippi, women are required to receive state-directed counseling, which must take place in person, and they must then wait 24 hours before returning to have the procedure. A woman must undergo an ultrasound before an abortion is provided, and the provider must offer her the option to view the image. Abortion is under further restrictions in Mississippi, where a state law passed last year would mandate that abortion care providers have admitting privileges at local hospitals, something that no abortion provider in Mississippi has been able to secure. In fact, Dr. Willie Parker is the sole remaining abortion care provider in the state of Mississippi. He flies from his home in Chicago twice a month to provide abortion care to women there. How did Dr. Parker come to be the sole abortion provider in Mississippi? Well, I could start with his upbringing in Birmingham, Alabama, one of 6 children raised by a single mother in a fundamentalist Christian household. Dr. Parker went to medical school at the University of Iowa and went on to receive an M.P.H. from Harvard and is currently on the faculty of Northwestern Medical School. He spent the early years of his career as an obstetrician-gynecologist providing primarily obstetric care and declining to provide abortion care. He describes, in his own words, a come-to-Jesus moment when he decided to provide abortion care to women. He was inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King's reflections on the parable of the Good Samaritan. He writes, "I had an epiphany. Rather than being concerned about what will happen to me for providing the care, what my fellow Christian travelers will think of me, I became more concerned about what would happen to women when that care was not available." Dr. Parker says, "I do abortions because I am a Christian." I want to take just a final moment to reflect on how Dr. Parker expresses the courage of his convictions in his work by reflecting on the risks that he takes every day. He himself has said that he does not want to be overly concerned about threats to his own well-being by virtue of his status as an abortion care provider. He claims to do so would be a distraction, and he says, "I won't be distracted. It's what I believe in my heart is the right thing to do." I also want to note that in 2013, Dr. Parker received the George M. Tiller Award, named after Dr. Tiller, an abortion care provider who was assassinated in his church in 2009. Dr. Parker, in fact, gave up obstetrics to become a full-time abortion care provider on the day Tiller was assassinated. It's with immense admiration, respect, and gratitude that I welcome Dr. Parker to the Woodrow Wilson School.
Thank you for that very generous introduction and for enumerating all of the pieces of high-priced education I have. Somehow, though, when I go to Starbucks, they still charge me the same for my mocha frappuccino. But I thank you for your warm introduction. It's my pleasure to be here with you. I started out in Birmingham, Alabama this morning, and after a flight delay in Atlanta because of the nor'easter that's been coming through here again and again and again, I'm here, so I'm happy to be here. Is Dr. James Trussell in the house?
He is not.
Okay. I wanted to just pay my gratuities to Dr. Trussell, who is on faculty here, who made this all possible, because it was through his recommendation that I received the invite. And Dr. Trussell has been critical in generating the evidence basis for contraception and family planning that we use daily to help women and families make decisions about what's right for them. Dr. Trussell and I became Facebook friends, so I went from just an admirer of his in terms of the tremendous amount of work that he did to now that I also call him friend, so I just want to thank him publicly. When it comes to reproductive rights and reproductive justice, when I look at the U.S. map regarding the access to those rights, I could use the opening monologue for Star Trek and its theme music. Now, Star Trek is a series that aired, peaked, and went into syndication before most people in this room were born. And yet, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it because of its long run in syndication. Now, I was babysat a lot by TV growing up, and the key phrase that I remember from that opening monologue is the declaration of the intent of the Starfleet, of which the U.S. Enterprise and Captain Kirk and all the gang were a member of Starfleet. And the key phrase, when that show would come on weekly, is that the mission of the Starfleet was to seek out life in outer space and to boldly go where no man had gone before. The data tells us, as was said earlier, that at least 90% of women in this country live in a county where there's no access to abortion care. And so while for Captain Kirk and crew, the final frontier was deep outer space, for those of us who care deeply about women's health and reproductive rights, the final frontier is those counties where women don't have access to the health care that we call abortion. Going to Mississippi, if I don't, who will? That was the title of an article that I wrote for the National Partnership for Women and Families a few years ago, but more importantly, that was the question that I asked myself the first time before I visited Jackson Women's Health Organization in August of 2011. Jackson Women's Health, or JWHO as we call it, it's also known as the eponymous Pink House. It is the only open clinic in the state of Mississippi, and I would bet it is the only clinic that is painted bubblegum pink, and hence is named the Pink House. My visit to Jackson Women's Health occurred approximately 3 months before that state defeated a fetal personhood, and roughly 5 months before the current governor took office to declare that he was intent on making Mississippi an abortion-free state. After becoming a full-time abortion provider, as was said earlier, on the day that Dr. George Tiller was assassinated, I had met Dr. Tiller and had interacted with him, and he was a very gracious and humble and courageous man, and I only hope to be as gracious and as courageous as he was. After approximately 2 years after meeting Dr. Tiller, I made the decision to do this work full time. And in doing so, I was matched with the clinic in Mississippi through the work of an activist who sought to identify clinical facilities where there were services in place, but no doctor in that state to provide the services. And so based on my having identified myself as someone willing to travel, when asked if I would consider working in Mississippi, my first response was no, and my second response was, hell no. I'd seen Mississippi burning one too many times, having grown up in Alabama, and I recall as I often drove through the back roads of Mississippi on my way to school at the University of Iowa, that because of my my travel along the same roads that many African American travelers would travel at night to avoid incidental conflict with racist whites that could escalate to who knows where. I recall thinking explicitly as I traveled those roads that somehow the nights seemed darker and the trees seemed taller in Mississippi. However, I decided that if I was going to say no, I at least owed it to myself to go and see what the possibilities were. So I flew into Mississippi, and right away, it had a lot of similarities to my hometown of Birmingham, Jackson did. And when I arrived at the clinic and met the staff, many of whom were women who had been veterans of the civil rights struggles in the state of Mississippi who were now applying their efforts towards reproductive rights, I decided right away that that was the place where I wanted to make my contribution to access, securing access for women. That the overturning of Roe has not been possible in the last 40+ years is precisely why we now have our present-day climate of clinic sabotage, terrorism of doctors and patients, anti-women vitriol, murderers of providers, and even more critically, we are now in a phase of, it seems to be, incessant effort to parse away at the provisions of the Roe decision with state-level legislation that would, for all practical purposes, make access to abortion virtually impossible, even if it remains legal. Mandatory waiting periods, parental notification laws, targeted clinic regulations, telemedicine prohibitions, and the Hyde Amendment, which basically makes it illegal to use federal funds to provide abortion services for women who are relying on Medicaid for their health care. These things all represent what I call a political salami approach to parse away at the basic substance of women's fundamental right to health care and reproductive privacy. Here's what that looks like firsthand from my view as a plaintiff in the litigation to block the change in abortion regulations in Mississippi. Those regulations now require, as was said, anyone providing abortions to hold hospital admitting privileges, as well as to be a board-certified OBGYN. I am board-certified, but to date, neither I nor we have successfully recruited 2 other doctors to work in Mississippi. None of us have been able to secure admitting privileges. And the implication of that is that if the law were allowed to be fully implemented, it would result in the closure of the sole clinic in that state, which would, for me, be my worst nightmare, because that would mean that there would be another place in this country where women would lack access to the vital service of abortion care. You know, it's been said that when you wrestle with your conscience and you lose, you actually win. And so for me, that wrestling of conscience was a 12-year process that I lost about 10 years ago while a faculty member at the University of Hawaii. I had my dream job in the dream place. I was, as they say, chilling, overlooking the ocean from my condo, and yet something was unsettled in me because I was unable to ignore the fact that I was encountering women daily who had unplanned, unwanted pregnancies or wanted but lethally flawed ones. And so as a result of my battle, the stage was set for that battle in the fact that I grew up in Alabama, as you were told. And I grew up in Birmingham, and in my opinion, if Alabama is in the Bible Belt, Birmingham was the belt buckle. I had a traditional understanding of religion and spirituality as a fundamentalist Protestant Christian with a born-again experience at the age of 15. And what that meant for me was that I took my religious belief and understanding very seriously. And so because of that, while I had not had any explicit teaching that abortion was wrong, although it was kind of implied, given that in my community there were many teens and single women who were forced to continue pregnancies, whether they were ready or able to parent or not, I chose to err on the side of not violating my conscience or understanding by not providing abortions, even though I never questioned a woman's right to make that decision. So again, for me, that was a 12-year wrestling after going to college and becoming a scientist and a science major, and then on to medical school, and then choosing women's health. And then again, seeing women on a regular basis who had to face the decision about when and whether or not to become a parent. So I wrestled with that for 12 years, and my epiphany or breakthrough in terms of being able to provide this care actually came with me actually rehearing a sermon by Dr. Martin Luther King, as was said earlier. Again, Dr. King very eloquently told the story of the Good Samaritan and what made the Good Samaritan good. And Dr. King said that this person who was an outsider to the community and happened to be from Samaria and hence called a Samaritan, stopped to help a fallen traveler who had been injured in a robbery. And while everyone else passed by who was from that person's community, and their major concern was, what will happen to me if I stop to help this person? The Samaritan reversed the question of concern and asked, what will happen to this person if I don't stop to help him? And for me, that resonated deeply as someone, again, who saw women on a regular basis with need for ending pregnancies. And at that moment, it became for me not only appropriate to put the well-being of my patients ahead of my own personal concerns, but it became almost for me a moral imperative to do so. Whereas many people, as they go through their values clarification, they eventually become comfortable providing abortion care. For me, I became uncomfortable not providing abortion care as a women's health provider when I knew what women faced. So it was really, for me, a matter of conscience, my own, in terms of recognizing that it is never immoral for a woman to make a decision about her health and her well-being and her families, and that her personal moral decisions had nothing to do with my morality. In fact, for me, it became totally consistent with my own deep-held spiritual values of compassion to provide that service for women when they choose it, because if you don't, the perils that are unnecessary and that are that go beyond the immediate impact for that woman, but for the family that she is responsible for, is widespread. So for me, it came, my decision came with the sense of clarity and the very strong conviction that providing abortion care was the right thing to do, and that it was totally consistent with my deepest concern for my fellow human being. So fast forward, after making that decision and making the decision to go to the University of Michigan and to acquire the training, answering the call to go to Mississippi, I began traveling to Mississippi in May of 2012 to address the fact that that state has, as I've said several times, only one clinic. And at that time, it had one provider traveling there, as there were no doctors in Mississippi who were willing to provide that care, although there were several doctors who were privately sympathetic with the plight of women there. So, but that reality that there was no one traveling there except for one doctor, I decided that the women in Mississippi were one flight delay away, one major illness away from one physician burnout away from not having access at all to their constitutionally guaranteed rights to health care and privacy. And so for me, it motivated me to go for a couple of reasons. First, being from the South, Alabama, as you've heard, I know firsthand the realities of poverty, lack of access to education, and no health care, and the hardships that those realities impose. Mississippi, which is the sister state to my home state, is one of the poorest states in this country. Roughly 20% of all Mississippians live below the poverty level, but about 42% of African Americans in Mississippi live below the poverty level. What that means is that people are already in dire straits and dire circumstances, and if they don't have ways of making decisions, which are sometimes economic decisions, which are sometimes social decisions, but very complex decisions about their lives, the lack of ability to do so further entrenches poverty and further exacerbates already suffering that's already occurring. So first, I went because that's where the need was. Second, being a reproductive health provider, I'm aware that all reproductive age women are at risk for, who are sexually active are at risk for an unplanned pregnancy. But women of color and women living in poverty, two communities that are often synonymous but not always the same, tend to have higher rates of unintended pregnancy because they often have higher rates of lacking access to medically accurate sex education, evidence-based contraception, access to health care at all, and things that are other things that we would call the social determinants of health. That this is the reality to a fault in Mississippi led me to conclude that the women in Mississippi are amongst the most vulnerable in this country, and hence they were in dire need and very much deserving of my help, and so I chose to prioritize their need by making sure that I'm available to secure their access. The third thing that motivated me to go to Mississippi was, as a physician, understanding the prior things that I mentioned to you, but also as a person of color and as a self-described protector of human rights, I concluded that with the most vulnerable people in this country, in Mississippi being poor people and people of color, I decided that if I, a person of color, who graduated from the ranks of poverty and still experiencing color stigma, if I cannot make women whose lived experience is that, if I cannot make them a priority, then who will? Now, don't misunderstand me. This commitment is not any form of subtle tribalism, because I understand all too well that, as Zora Neale Hurston said, all my skin folk ain't my kinfolk. And what I mean by that is that some of the most ardent opponents who stand in solidarity with those who oppose abortion are, in my opinion, misguided people of color who also vilify women who make the decision to have abortion and who exaggerate and expound on the fact that those women are poor and women of color. And they are the ones who also co-sign what I call the Black genocide campaigns, and this is something that I'll speak to later. So this isn't about tribalism, nor is it about the promotion of a notion that is the responsibility of Black or Latino physicians to provide care solely for people from the communities from which they come, because these healthcare disparities and lack of access are American health problems. They're not unique to the communities of color, and these communities are American communities, and therefore it is the responsibility of the American health system to respond to this need. So I, again, am not being tribalistic in responding, but I'm taking a public health approach to the health disparities when women have lack of access to reproductive health decision-making. And I see myself as a first responder in a reproductive justice sense, in the same way we have, as a national and international community, responded to health crises around the globe, for example, as we did and are doing with regard to Ebola. So I simply see myself as on the front line, the first person in, because I recognize the need. And I'm hoping that as I continue to echo this message, that there people will also see the urgency and take up the mantle. So I alluded to earlier the whole notion of this whole idea of a Black genocide campaign. One of the things I want to say to kind of demonstrate to you how pressing that issue is. When I started in Mississippi, as noble as I thought my efforts were, not everyone was happy to see me.
The Bible says that God hates the hands that shed innocent blood. You need to repent before it's too late. Go in there and count and tell me how many blacks you got in there versus how many whites. It's genocide. You going to count for me and tell me how many are black and how many are white? Are you going to do that for me?
Why should I do anything?
And genocide?
Okay.
Genocide?
All right.
You're participating in an extermination of your own race.
And what are you participating in
You
now?
are a disgrace.
Thank you.
You are a disgrace to the medical profession. Did you take the Hippocratic Oath before you became a so-called doctor, where it says you'll do no harm? The first thing is to do no harm. A doctor is supposed to protect life, not exterminate it. You need to repent before it's too late. The Bible says God hates blood. You need to repent before it's too late.
You know, thank you. You know, it's that is not very far off that, like a loop, because that guy's there every week, and it's pretty much that's kind of what happens every week. But what I want to say is probably that whole exchange was worse for you than it was for me. He was very animated, and he's very, as you can see, very insulting. But he doesn't bother me. Part of the dramatizing to show you that was twofold. One, that's what women have to come by him to get to me, to get their care, right? So that's what women go through to access their right to privacy and health care. They have to go by this person who's entitled to his opinion, and he's entitled to even say what he has to say, but that's what they have to go through. But I also wanted to show you, from the words of people who oppose abortion, his main thrust was that abortion is a form of black genocide. And what allows him to make that allegation is a misrepresentation of the very real and concrete epidemiologic evidence that shows that disproportionately, on a proportionate basis, the highest rate of abortion occurs to black women followed by Latina women, but in actuality, the highest number of abortions in the absolute sense occur to white women because there are more white women than there are women of color. So I want to speak to the horrible actions of abortion opponents that you just saw demonstrated that for me personally are very offensive, and it leaves me offended by the white proponents of this message, and it leaves me very disappointed in the black ones. And the whole thrust of this aspect of reproductive rights is, while the legal battle over abortion is occurring at the state and local levels as they try and set the stage for overturning Roe, the actual cultural battle for the hearts and minds of the public is being fought in these ideologic wars and framing abortion in ways that are totally misrepresentative of what the issue of abortion is about. In this case, they've decided, as a very effective and cynical strategy, to frame abortion as black genocide. And that campaign has gained more traction over the years. There have been major African-American communities where billboards have been purchased to declare that the most dangerous place for a black baby is in the womb of its mother, as if and describing black babies as an endangered species, as if they are something other than human, and that as if mothers are totally detached from the pregnancies that they're carrying. So the substance of the allegation is the following. Try and stay with me if you can. The abortion opponents allege that abortion is a genocidal plot by the government, fronted by Planned Parenthood, to build abortion clinics in black communities and to coerce black women to use contraception and to have abortions to kill off black babies and to use dangerous contraception to injure themselves and thereby to decimate the black race. They allege that there's a Negro plot that was put in place by the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, and that this is allegedly core to Planned Parenthood's mission today. That sounds pretty horrific, right? Meanwhile, back here on planet Earth, where the reality is that women are making tough decisions about their lives every day, let's say I concede that all of these arguments are true. The question still remains, what does any of that have to do in 2015 with a woman, no matter what her color is, making the decision to end a pregnancy that she does not want or that she wants but knows is lethally flawed? It has nothing to do with the self-determination and the agency that women, all human beings, are due in this country and on this planet. So the problem with the whole black genocide argument for me is that it requires you to embrace and to assume that women are unable and incapable of thinking for themselves or making decisions about their lives. And I, for one, simply do not believe that. The late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan said, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but nobody's entitled to their own facts. And the facts are the following. You heard some of them earlier, but the facts are that black women, followed by Hispanic women, have disproportionately high rates of abortion, making them together the greatest proportion of women who have abortions. But the largest absolute number of abortions happen for white women because they're the larger population group. Abortions come from unplanned, unwanted pregnancies, not from where you build the clinic. Only 9% of abortion clinics are, since they raised the argument, someone did a study. Only 9% of abortion clinics are situated near predominantly black communities, not the 75% that the former African-American presidential candidate Herman Cain repeatedly alleged. And with regard to Margaret Sanger's involvement with the black community, Margaret Sanger started birth control clinics in the African-American community in Harlem at the invitation of black leaders of her day, like W.E.B. Du Bois, Mary McLeod Bethune, and others. And it was due to those leaders recognizing that the birth control message that she was propagating in the clinics throughout New York would also benefit African-American women. And so there was no targeted messaging for the black community. In fact, Margaret Sanger, in keeping with the rest of her day, her attention was to the white community. She was not necessarily directed towards black women, but she was not opposed to going to that community, and so she did. These facts illustrate that the black genocide noise, as I call it, is one, ahistorical and therefore intentionally misleading and racially insulting. Two, is not reflective at all of the reality of women's lives, either black or white. And three, it is a patriarchal and parochial effort at the reproductive control of all women by shaming black women and by paralyzing the majority of white reproductive rights defenders with allegations of racism, which in my opinion is, I usually reserve terms like brilliant for positive things, but it is a dastardly Jedi mind trick, because it exploits the notion that we as a society are very uncomfortable with notions of race. And so you take people who are well-meaning and want to help people who have the greatest need, in this case, disproportionately women of color. And so the majority of the healthcare system is still white people, mostly white men, although that's changing with the number of women. And so it really becomes racist not to provide this care, if you look at it in a straight way, to withdraw from providing this much needed care for women who are in these health crises is really racist, but yet it takes a little bit of thought to see beyond this trick. So the racism charge comes from what I call a pseudo-transparency tactic. The white proponents say, see, I told you there's a conspiracy. They're out to get black people. And I have reformed from my ways, I have reformed of my racism, and so I'm going to give you the real inside scoop. And then for the conspiracy theorists amongst the black population, they co-sign the messages. See, I told you they were out to get us. And what happens is people who don't think critically take this up, and they get twisted and tangled, and they act against their own best interests, or people who are well-meaning become paralyzed by the concern of being perceived as racist when they are offering help to people who need it most. So that really, for me, is a very dangerous and a very cynical approach to some very complex issues. So what are we to do about this? These are my final thoughts. We must deploy all of the resources that we can muster to the places where women have the need. Mississippi is one of many, but it has probably the most pronounced need of any place I've ever been. I'm seeing women there every time I go who, despite being abjectly poor, somehow they come up with the money to have the abortions that they need, and increasingly they are seeking solutions that will allow them to avoid unplanned, unwanted pregnancies, like long-acting methods of contraception. I would like to see us expand the capacity for women to have these services and to have access to the full range of modern methods of contraception and the other resources that they need to live meaningful lives. My personal conviction about these things has led me to lead by example, by going to Mississippi to make sure that women have the access, and to make sure that if a woman can muster the courage to come by guys like that, I want to make sure that there's somebody there to meet her so that she will not feel that everyone's indifferent to her plight. When these people tell them that they're terrible mothers, that they don't care about their children, that they're murderers, that they can't be Christian, I want to make sure that there's a competing narrative. As I sit across from the women, as you heard earlier, women are required to do face-to-face counseling with the provider in Mississippi. And when I sit across from women, and I see the look in their eyes that says, after they come from hours, after they've raised the money, come for hours to sign a consent that they now have to wait 24 hours more to access their services, their eyes say to me, whatever you say, please don't say no to me. And when I see that, for me, it is unsettling because I simply believe that it's too much power for one human being to have over another person's life. But I am reassured, and I do redeem that meeting by understanding that because I'm there, I can help her continue to be hopeful and put her life back on track. But I am unsettled by the fact that I have that much power over another person's life. I think about the 35-year-old mother of 5 that I saw recently, whose 2-year-old had recently died to a childhood cancer, and she found herself 9 weeks pregnant. And she told me during her counseling that she was not financially able or emotionally able to care for another child at this time. I think about the 15-year-old who was pregnant by a boyfriend who believed in premarital sex but did not believe in abortion, and that his family would try and court order her to continue the pregnancy if he knew. I thought about her, who was this young woman who was being reared by her grandmother, who had to sell her couch in order to pay for this young woman's abortion. And that's what I call a ride or die grandma. And everybody deserves to have a ride or die grandma like that. But her grandmother did what she had to do materially to make it possible for her to have to put her life back on track. I think about the 37-year-old mother of 3 who recently had undergone a mastectomy for a breast cancer that was diagnosed during her pregnancy, and she now had an 11-month-old, and when she went for her reconstructive consultation, she was found to have a recurrent in her scar. And she came to me because she was now 9 weeks pregnant, and she had to terminate this pregnancy, or chose to terminate this pregnancy because she could not get the chemo she needed unless she did so. And she tells me that, I'm ending this pregnancy so I can be around to raise the 2 other kids that I already have. So when I think about the necessity for these women, when people frame it as a choice or as a decision, or that women are callous and carefree, I find them to be anything but. So I'm going to close by sharing with you the thoughts that I visit on a regular basis, and I issue to you as food for thought and provocation, because that's what they serve for me. First, in order for this society to grow great, collectively, we must continue to plant trees under which we will never sit. And what that means for me is we have to collectively and on an individual basis do things that will not directly benefit us personally, but that they're the right things to do to make this world the kind of place that we would want to live in. And the final thing that I do on a pretty consistent basis is I look into the mirror and I repeat the exhortation of that wise American sage, Dr. Seuss, when he says in the Lorax, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm going to stop right there, and I'll answer any questions that you might have. When I saw people queuing up, I thought people were about to run out the door.
Thank you, Dr. Parker.
Sure.
As is our custom, we'll give students the opportunity to ask the first questions of Dr. Parker this afternoon. I want to remind everyone that this is a Q, as in question and A session. Make sure that you have a question mark at the end of your oration. This is not a platform for making statements. And finally, I hardly need to point out that abortion is a controversial issue that stimulates strongly held and fervently expressed beliefs. And I would just ask that everyone remain respectful in our dialogue this afternoon.
Before I take the first question, I'm gonna, this is my point of departure. Two things that I always bear in mind about this issue, but about anything that I dialogue with another person. The political pundit Walter Gibbons said that where all think alike, none think too much. So I would full well expect on this issue where people feel deeply and strongly and people come from various points of view that a thoughtful approach means that we can think differently, and that will hopefully, as Gandhi said, lead to honest disagreement. Gandhi said honest disagreement can be the beginning of progress. And so on this issue, I will engage with you as sincerely and as meaningfully as possible. And even if we both end up uncomfortable, my hope is that at the end of the conversation, there will be a lot of light and not a whole lot of heat. So that's where we'll start.
And we'll follow our usual practice of alternating sides. We're going to start today with the left.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm a second year here at the Woodrow Wilson School. Thank you for coming to speak to us. We know that, my question is about empathy, so there's a question. We know that 1 in 3 women have abortions, and I'm one of those women. I know it's highly stigmatized, and it's very difficult for me to say this in such a large group, but I do, because in college, I never thought I would have an unplanned pregnancy. I always used protection. I never thought I would have an abortion, even with an unplanned pregnancy, and I realized that it's very difficult to know how you're going to act in that situation until you get there. And I realized, even though I thought I was an empathetic person, I didn't have that empathy. And I wonder, is there a gap in empathy here in the US? And if so, how do we close that gap?
Well, thank you very much for your question. Thank you for It takes a lot of courage and a lot of self-awareness and a lot of serenity to disclose something about yourself that is highly stigmatized. And I think you answered your own question. Yes, there is an empathy gap because people have what I call as magical thinking. There's a large gap between what they think what they would actually do and what they think they would do. Right? And so people often, in a very would never have an abortion. And in fact, I go out of my way to discuss in Mississippi, in a place where there's high degree of religiosity, where people self-describe as Christians, and there's a very narrow understanding of what that means. Women who are crying profoundly because they are about to have an abortion, and apparently on the surface feels like a conflict with their public identity. And what I tell them is, if you're here and you've criticized someone for having an abortion in your Christian understanding, that does not make you a hypocrite. It just makes you hopefully understand, as you said, that you can never say what you will do until you're in this situation. And that is not the same as having situational ethics. It is to say that most of us don't know ourselves as well as we think we do. We will, at the end of the day, the most powerful thing as a human being is the ability to rationalize. And we say that in the abortion community, everybody has 3 situations under which they approve abortion: rape, incest, and mine. Whatever my reason is the third reason for most folks. So I say the closing of the gap, the solution is when a very bright and engaging Princeton graduate student can stand unashamedly and say that I made the decision to not become a parent before I was ready. That closes the gap, because when you refuse to accept the shame that others might try and impose upon you, you have just, if the stats are to be believed, 1 in 3 women before the age of 45 will have an abortion. You're not the only person in this room who's had an abortion. So you just really empowered somebody else. So the gap closes when people don't accept the stigma and shame. Thank you for doing so.
Hi, my name is Christian Say. I help run one of the pro-life organizations here on campus. Before the question, I would like to point out that there is no protest here, and that's intentional because this is a university and we respect your right to speak and the right of all ideas to be heard. That said, I am deeply disappointed with the Woodrow Wilson School's decision to present your view as university orthodoxy. Reasonable people of goodwill can disagree on the issue of abortion, and to say that this is an issue of reproductive justice and freedom and to present you as a hero is to ignore that fact. I oppose abortion because I believe it results in the death of an innocent human being, not because I am somehow ridiculously opposed to justice or freedom. Again, I would just like to reiterate that we have no problem with your right to speak. We just have a problem with the university's refusal to even acknowledge that there can be another view, right? So now for my question. So currently under state law, you are only allowed to perform abortions up until the 25th week. But if that law did not exist, what is the latest you would perform on abortion?
I don't draw a line in the sand. I respect the law. I honor the law. I think the law is rooted in science. I think the law in terms of, although it was extremely visionary of when the Roe statute was written, it says that the state has a compelling interest when the point of viability is established. Right now, the scientific limit is right at about 25 weeks with an accurately dated pregnancy, 25 completed weeks. So in terms of women being able to make the decision about having an abortion, with the only certitude I need from them is that they're clear about the decision they're making, I am willing and do provide abortions up to the limit of scientifically established viability, although that is not a hard and fast line. With regard to, there are diagnoses of pregnancy that are tragically made after the point of viability, right? There are pregnancies that are not viable. A 2-chamber heart for somebody who's diagnosed at 27 weeks is not a viable pregnancy. There are some who would say that that woman should continue that pregnancy with all of the attendant risks that go with continuing a pregnancy. I simply believe that a woman in the face of a non-viable pregnancy for fetal indications, or if she has health issues that would prohibit her from safely continuing a pregnancy, I'm certainly willing to aid and assist that woman. So I agree with you that it's all a life process. And I think where we differ is people who hold an understanding of life as an event, or like life begins at conception. It's all a life process. The question is, we can agree that it's a life process. The question becomes of rights to personhood. You know, we can even disagree about when personhood begins. You probably believe that it begins in the womb. We can debate that with regard to your religious understanding versus mine. But from a scientific standpoint, the rights of personhood are conferred by the state. My question is always, at what point is a woman not a person? At what point does a woman not have the right to protect her health and her right to well-being? And a question appropriately asked is 50% answered. I'm really not interested in creating a light beer commercial that tastes great, less filling, so I'm glad I got some applause and you got some applause. But I think at the end of the day, what we have to really be focused on is, at what point do we honor the agency of people, right? And you know, that as of right now, the state does not confer personhood on fetuses. I use the term fetus because that is a scientific, there's no ambiguity in what we say when we mean that. When you say the term person, there's a lot more ambiguity. So I respect everything you said, and I really appreciate that you propose another view, which gives us a chance to really explore this in a meaningful way. Thank you for your question.
Hi, my name is Dan Edelman. I'm a second-year Master in Public Affairs student here at the Woodrow Wilson School. Right out of undergrad, I joined the Mississippi Teacher Corps and taught and coached in a high school in Jackson for 2 years. And I guess coming from my own prejudices as a secular New Yorker, probably the most surprising conversation I had in Mississippi was with a group of girls I coached in soccer, where they were talking about the high teen pregnancy rate in their school, and where they showed, despite all of their very religious backgrounds, a surprising amount of empathy for the women they went to school with who they knew had gotten abortions at the same clinic you're working at now. And I guess my question was, for a crowd that I think I can safely assume has not spent much time in places like Jackson or Birmingham, were there many things or anything that surprised you particularly about Mississippians in terms of either opposition or affirmation for your work?
Well, thank you for your question, and probably as a Northern who went to Mississippi, one of the things that you probably at least gained an appreciation for, if not a fondness, was the comeback sauce. The food in Mississippi has, it'll kill you, but you'll die happy. One of the things that I was pleasantly surprised about in going home to the South is, I think the South suffers from a public relations problem. It's really self-indulgent of people who don't live in the South to think that people are backwards and ignorant, not progressive. But the reality is that a personhood amendment could be defeated in Mississippi politically, says that there are people who are able to think in a complex way about issues that are often overly simplified in order to become a value voting issue. So I was pleasantly surprised that in a non-stereotypical way that there is a progressive body politic in states like Mississippi and Alabama. And in some ways, it would imply that the government is not necessarily representative because of the ability to frame issues in a values voting way. They're able to sweep into power to pull the levers of that force people to act out against their own best interests. So I would say that I was pleasantly surprised that there's a progressive body politic, but I shouldn't have been, because it's the same body politic that allowed race relations to change in Mississippi. It's the same body politic that allowed in Alabama gay marriage, people to be married. So that kind of ability to think in a critical way and to not default to traditional religious understanding and to maintain your religious identity. There are a lot of people of faith who support the fact that women have the right to choose. And I was pleasantly surprised about that in Alabama. If I can go back to you, one article that I want to share with you in terms of, if you would Google it, it's called "Shall the Fundamentalists Win?" It's by Harry Emerson Fosdick. And it was an article where someone weighed in a religious way very critical thoughts about what does it mean when people who are sincere about their faith understanding view differently and differ vigorously on issues like that are rooted in science. So Harry Emerson Fosdick.
Let me.
Okay, I'm sorry?
I don't have any religious argument.
Oh, well, this is about critical thought, but it was done by a pastor, so I'm posing it in that regard.
I just want to encourage people in each line to look at how long the lines are and to make your question as succinct as possible.
And I'll shorten my answers.
Sorry, the right-hand side first.
To those ends, I'm Zach Horton, and I'm a member of Princeton Pro-Life here.
Okay.
Thank you for inviting us to engage with you. I hope you'll engage with me in this
Absolutely.
question. Because I would like you to invite you to step into my shoes here for a second and suppose that you were to believe, as I and many in this room do, that abortion amounts to murder. Mm-hmm. How would you act if you believed that? Would you regard that as a private moral opinion? And if not, would you please explain your disparaging remarks about pro-life activists like myself?
First of all, I will apologize if I made a disparaging remark, but I would invite you to remind me of which remark I made that was disparaging.
For instance, the video and subsequent remarks.
The video that the gentleman,
Sorry.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Would you act like that gentleman say, or would you, sorry, how would you act?
How would,
if you believe that?
well, what you're raising is, am I a person of conscience? And my answer is yes, I am. What you're raising in the ways that, when you say the term murder, murder is a process where a life is ended with intent, and life, the life of a person is ended. Where we disagree is, I don't confer personhood on a fetus. That's why I refer to scientific language. And as I said earlier, you and I hold religious beliefs too. I hold a religious understanding. It may not be yours. And so it would be disingenuous and be disrespectful to the deep way in which I know you hold your belief for me to be disparaging. And if I came across to that, I apologize. That was not my intent. The article that I suggest to this gentleman relates to the fact that people can, within a faith tradition, hold diametrically opposed views, and that not one of them, the believer or the non-believer, with regard to whose opinion you're talking about, has the right to validate or invalidate the other. So I would never seek to invalidate the position of someone who disagrees with me on why I perform abortions.
I appreciate your response. I just wanted to know what you would do if you held my beliefs, if you held my
beliefs. If I held your beliefs, I couldn't do what I do. So I don't hold your beliefs. That's why I can do what I do.
Hi, Dr. Parker. I'm Magda, and I'm a second-year M.P.H student at the Woodrow Wilson School, and I just want to thank you, Princeton University, for inviting you here. So abortion is seen as often the last resort in reproductive health and rights, and what do you think that states like Mississippi and the United States in general can do to reduce unintended pregnancies state and nationwide?
Well, thank you for your question. Abortion is seen as a last resort, primarily because it is stigmatized and seen as, when you think of abortion categorically, versus thinking of abortion being one point along a reproductive health continuum, abortion becomes the right choice for someone who's not ready to become a parent, but who also couldn't bring themselves to give away a pregnancy and to consider adoption. Abortion becomes the right issue for someone who has a lethally flawed pregnancy and does not want to incur the remaining health risks. So I think part of the fact that we consider a last resort is that it remains deeply stigmatized, as opposed to being one of several reproductive health options. If we want to not put people in jeopardy and create entrapment, we have to weigh all of the reproductive outcomes equally. We should make it as easy for someone to consider adoption, as easy for someone to get the resources they need to parent in a way that would be appropriate if they bring a child into the world. And we should make it as easy for women to prevent pregnancies that they don't want to have by having access to medically accurate sex education. So we create dilemmas. For example, we will pay for tubal sterilization for poor women, but we won't pay for an abortion. When you don't have all of your options presented to you, that is not non-directive counseling, that is a subtle form of coercion. So we coerce women either to have babies or to not get pregnant at all, but we don't respect the full range of decision-making that they should have in the context of moral agency and reproduction.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Hi, Dr. Parker. My name is Avital. I'm a current Master's in Public Policy student here, but I'm also taking a year off between my third and fourth year of medical school. So Thank you for coming, and it's really nice to hear from you.
Thank
you for doing what you do. As a current medical student who's very passionate about ensuring equal access to care, all medical care for all individuals, I guess my question to you is, as a current provider to future provider, how do we improve medical education regarding the importance of increasing equitable access to abortion?
Yeah. Very good question. Thank you so much. Given that medical education and physicians are considered a public resource and a public good, in that virtually all medical education is heavily subsidized when you look at the specialty training through Medicare and the like, In order to make sure that we have an appropriately equipped workforce, we have to use the regulatory authority to ensure the content of medical education. That has to happen from two different directions. One, there has to be a demand for the product from people who are pursuing the craft with the understanding that abortion is a part of healthcare and medical care. And so we have to create the expectation that if you choose the craft to enter, that this is an expectation that you will have. That demand has to be driven from the consumers of medical education, but it also has to come from evidence-based health care. When we know that there are high rates of unintended pregnancy, when we know that there are high rates of infant mortality and maternal mortality, and they're disproportionately occurring to the same people who have high rates of unintended pregnancy, then we have to connect the dots and make evidence-based healthcare decisions with the ability to respect the right of people to differ, but we have to allow people to have their opinions, but we have to make decisions on the basis of facts. So we have to, in very meaningful ways, and sometimes uncomfortable ways, talk about these realities and decide how we collectively going to make decisions about what the content of care should be, fully respectful of the fact that some people may disagree with that.
Short, I apologize.
That's okay. The air is better down there, isn't it?
Yeah. My name is Shasti, and I'm a second-year master's student here at Woodrow Wilson, and I'm also a proud pro-choice Democrat, and really grateful that you're here, and want to thank you for your courage of conviction. I wanted to ask, sort of related to the sort of polarizing environment that you must come across on a regular basis. We saw in the film, we see it here. What are your moments of hope? Besides just working with the women, but do you see any space where this environment can kind of come down to a more lukewarm temperature, where we're able to sort of make some moves in the political realm, or just even being able to give access to women to be able to access these services? Yeah. What can be done? What can we do? What do you see from the ground?
Well, thank you for your question. One of the things I don't think could happen is in the way you can't legislate morality, you can regulate behavior. Like Dr. King used to say, the law can't make you love me, but it can keep you from taking a bat and hitting me over the head because you don't want to sit next to a black person. And similarly, people who will fundamentally oppose abortion, their opinions have to be fully respected. But in terms of the democratic process in which the way in which we shape policy, we have to make policy based on data. The kind of consciousness raising and kind of shift over time has to, we have multiple forums. We have to have forums like this where we can discuss and disagree without being disagreeable. The assassination of George Tiller is the ultimate disagreement by someone who opposes abortion. And when we don't have forums, and when people who oppose abortion won't disavow that kind of behavior, they become aiding and abetting to that kind of terrorism. Not to paint everybody who disagrees with abortion as terrorists, but I'm saying we have to create forums where we can disagree, and disagree on facts, or agree on facts, and respect differing opinions. I think the courageous act of the sister who stood up and said, I had an abortion. I will expose myself to your ability to decide that you think less than of me, or you think I was irresponsible, but I will not internalize the devaluation that you seek to project on me. When more women stand up and do that, right? When more providers speak out and say, I do abortions because of my religious understanding, and say that it's not a zero-sum game. The only people who hold moral positions are not the people who oppose abortion. Then I think we change the conversation, and we create a larger room for us all to operate within the frameworks of our own consciences.
Dr. Parker, hi, my name's Andrea Michelson. I'm a first-year Master of Public Affairs student here at Princeton, and thank you so much for coming here, and thank you to the university for having you here, and thank you for your courage and the work that you do. Thank you. One of the things that you mentioned in the article was that a lot of opponents of abortion seem to also oppose measures
such as comprehensive sexual education or such as support for mothers once they have children, reasons that bring them to have an abortion. What do you think can be done to sort of bridge that gap on that side? Because it seems to me that there's very little recourse for women if you follow that sort of line of thinking.
Well, I think a couple things. One, Dr. Jocelyn Elders, who was the Surgeon General for a short period of time under former President Clinton, said very eloquently, we have to get over the love affair we have with fetuses and start really caring about women and children. There are people who are very pro-birth, which is not the same as pro-life, because they are the same people who oppose medically accurate sex education, they oppose fair housing, education, meaningful work, and all the other things that go into raising a child once you bring it here. So I think we have to really, as a collectively, figure out and connect all the dots. From the standpoint of a competing narrative in terms of what can happen with people who oppose abortion, there have to be people from within the tradition to have reasoning dialogue. One of the tenets of, the Judeo-Christian scriptures is, come, let us reason together. And in order to reason together, you have to stop just residing in the echo chamber that's going to feed you back what you're used to hearing or what you want to hear. And so that's why I welcome public discourse. I welcome difference because we can both be enriched. But I think the competing narrative within faith communities of folk who make it clear that there's nothing mutually exclusive about making moral decisions about reproduction and holding a particular faith tradition. That's going to be how we move the ball in collective consciousness.
Thank you.
Sure.
Given how intimidating it is to be here, as the minority party, I can only imagine how difficult it is for a woman to walk into an abortion clinic in Mississippi, and I really appreciate that. I'll be brief. Birth control must lead ultimately to a cleaner race. And as the descendant of Holocaust survivors in a family, most of which didn't survive, I find that sort of language appalling, and that's the language of the founder of Planned Parenthood. I can't speak as a doctor, so I'll ask as a rights, a social justice issue, which I care about. Is abortion for you a struggle between competing rights of a 30-week child yet unborn and a mother, or is it really a unilateral question of the mother's right and her decision to choose?
Well, I appreciate your question. I'll address two things. One, I'll address the issue of when people quote and cite about remarks made by Margaret Sanger as the person who founded the birth control league that became Planned Parenthood. I think it's disingenuous, not intentionally, but to pull her out of the context of the period and the time in which she lived. Margaret Sanger sought to legitimize family planning, not abortion, because abortion wasn't, as well as childbirth, wasn't safe for many. And so she thought the most safest thing is to prevent the pregnancies that you don't want. And so there was never, it's a false competition. So number one, to pull Margaret Sanger out of context really doesn't serve the purpose. But two, you talk about, and then it goes back to, again, my desire that we acknowledge that we disagree. When you talk about an unborn or as yet unborn child and use child as a terminology, I talk about an unborn pregnancy as a fetus, right? Unborn, undead. I'm not being cynical. Am I pre-dead versus, And so when we use terms, we take terms and we conflate them and we kind of give them moral weight by making the language ambiguous. So you talk about a 30-week child. I know a 30-week fetus. If that fetus is competing with the health and well-being of a mother, then I am willing to end that pregnancy. As I said earlier, if someone is beyond the point of viability, which is 25 weeks, and there really is no point of viability, but in terms of making decisions about something that is not as hard and dry and as definitive, the fact that we disagree on what to call what we do and whose values are more appropriate in terms of making that decision, we'll have to agree to disagree publicly and privately, but I think part of the issue is we can't really come to grips on the terminology that we want to use, because you talk about a 30-week child, and I only know about a 30-week fetus.
Thank you, Doctor.
Hi, Dr. Parker. My name's Allie, and I'm a second-year master's student here at the Woodrow Wilson School. And thank you so much for being here. Your story really resonated with me as someone who's also from the Deep South and works on gender-based discrimination issues. Okay. And I was hoping, like many of the students in this room, especially we're now job searching, and I'm hoping you can provide some guidance, some practical advice for someone like myself who focuses on these issues and is torn between working on the international level and then returning to one's home state, which for me is Louisiana, where a lot of work, as you know, remains to be done. And what sort of guidance you can provide in terms of your personal experience and soul searching.
I would say thank you for acknowledging that I have to say you're my home girl. You stood up, you're from my neck of the woods, and I certainly appreciate that. I would say as you do soul searching, one of the key things that, as you just eloquently demonstrated, there's need. There's domestic need, and then there's international need. But I would offer you that the need is not the call, right? You will find multiple issues that would demand your attention, and if you were to apply yourself, you can make a difference. You have to search yourself about what is needed. I would say, as a lobbying effort, though, being back in the South, I had a chance to work internationally. I have worked internationally, and I most recently moved home to Birmingham, which is I live to make myself more available to work in the South. And I would say that we kind of conceptualize what I call the worthy poor and the unworthy poor. There's more of a willingness to go to Zimbabwe and provide care because somehow we think that people in developing countries are in dire straits by no fault of their own. However, our mythology here about self-determination leads us to be less sympathetic to people domestically who have need. So in fact, right now in Ghana, it's probably easier for a woman to get an abortion in Ghana, as still acknowledged as a developing country, than it is for a woman in Mississippi, because the laws in Ghana are more permissive, and there are more people willing to go to Ghana than there are to go to Mississippi. So I say, as you stratify, first, the need is not the call, but as you search yourself and decide what moves you, the only way you're going to do anything in a sustainable way is doing work that moves you. Sure.
Know that we need to end at 6, and so we have time for one, maybe two more questions. And I'm also
if I'm really diligent, I'll keep looking. I'll stop at 6.
You'll stop at 6.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm also going to ask everyone, when we end at 6, I'm going to ask everyone to remain seated while Dr. Parker exits Dodds. Thank you.
Ooh, it's your turn.
Hi, Mr. Parker. Thank you for talking to us. I'm deeply appreciative of the work that you do in Mississippi.
Thank you.
I'm from India, so I wanted to know how do you think the lessons that you've learned here pan out in the international context?
Okay. I thank you for your question. I think we have to be moved by, there should be something about human suffering and misery that should move us all. That, in my opinion, should be called compassion, whether it comes from a place of humanism or religious understanding. We have to stop having competing miseries. We have to stop thinking that it's more dire in India versus Mississippi. That said, my goal would be to say that whenever you see, the lesson I've learned is whenever you see a need, fill it. Marcus Aurelius said, no longer talk about what sort of person one ought to be such. If you feel moved when you see suffering, plant the tree under which you'll never sit. And so I think the lessons that I've learned is that no matter where people are, they are worthy of the help that you're able to provide. Find it in yourself to provide it and fill the space. The other thing I would say is, even though we in this country tend to think that U.S. rights trump human rights and international rights, that we have to rise to a level of human decency and an international standard of what constitutes the entitlements that people have to health, dignity, and human rights.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Brandon Joa. I'm a freshman at the university. Doctor, you mentioned you mentioned unreadiness to have a child or economic difficulty as reasons to have an abortion. So when there are literally thousands of people waiting to adopt and also hundreds of people waiting to adopt children with disabilities such as Down syndrome, why is adoption being downplayed so much and abortion being used as a form of eugenics where 90% of people with Down syndrome are aborted?
That's a very good question. Thank you very much for the question. And I would say that I don't think you're totally accurate. It's really easy to talk about thousands of people being willing to adopt, but the most unadoptable children in this country are African-American children. 40% of children in foster care are African-American. Given that the women who would continue pregnancies, contrary to how it's framed, I guess you can literally say abortion is birth control in that it doesn't allow you to give birth. But most of the women are trying to, 60 to 70% of women in the month that they became pregnant and sought an abortion used birth control in that month. So given that we don't have any perfect methods of birth control, I think it's a misrepresentation of abortion being used as birth control, and that there are not people standing in line to adopt babies if you're talking about African-American babies. Again, 40% of who are in foster care. People go all the way to China or Russia and some other places where they've stopped adoptions, but will go right by the foster care system where there are little black babies, because part of it is there's the false perception that any baby that's in, any black baby in foster care is a drug baby, as if there's any such thing as a drug baby. So I don't think the way the facts are being proposed are totally accurate.
You asked about Down syndrome.
Okay, Down syndrome is a clinical diagnosis that is one of the few chromosomal abnormalities that can survive into viability, but often with severe and complicated situations. There's no way to predict exactly how well a Down's baby will do, but it is within the prerogative, in my opinion, and in accepted course of medical counseling, that patients be presented with options, and parents who are presented with options when they incur the diagnosis of Down syndrome, some of them decide to terminate and some of them do not. Yes.
Thank you. As a policy student, I was wondering if you could discuss some of the options that you see as ways to improve access to abortion services and other critical care for women, particularly either in areas that aren't served very well. So do you think things like telecommunication and providing interview services through online, like video chatting, something like that, is a promising policy area, or do you think we should just really focus on improving the supply of providers?
It was extremely promising until in a state like Iowa had made marvelous strides with telemedicine, but now there are targeted legislation, like in Mississippi, it is against the law to do abortion by telemedicine. So every policy innovation, people figure out ways to thwart. So most of the legislation that's being crafted is being crafted in ways to make it unassailable in a political process, but it's also reflecting the efforts at clinical innovation to meet clinical needs. So there are many things that come up, but as soon as they come up, they're often thwarted in policy. So maybe a role for policymakers is to endeavor to make sure that good ideas come to light by having equal expertise with regard to policy and helping them to avoid the pitfalls where people use regulatory authority to the point of abuse.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Dr. Parker, thank you again for sharing your time.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay.